Three. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Timothy Horn. Welcome to my new podcast, An Author's Advice. I'm creating this podcast to share my many years of writing experience with you guys. A little background on myself. I published my first detective novel when I was a senior in high school back in 2020. Since then, I have now published two detective novels, a children's poetry book, and a handful of short stories. So I have been around the block, as they say, and I would like to share my writing experience with people who are either just starting out as writers or would like to one day become writers. So, how this podcast is going to work is every episode, I'm going to have a different person on here with me, and we're going to have a discussion about a topic related to writing chosen by that person. And each episode, hopefully, I'm going to be able to share my experience with you guys by answering their questions. So today I have my good friend Ryan Spinello on here, and the topic he has chosen is why is creativity so important to the creative and writing process? Okay.
Awesome. Well, what's up, guys? I'm Ryan. Like Tim said, we're good friends, and I'm glad to be a part of this. I'm not a writer by any means, but I'm glad to be a part of this and be able to ask Tim some questions and kind of pick his brain a little bit. So I'll get started with my first question, which is, I've heard a lot of people say throughout my life that once we grow and become a teenager, we're not a kid anymore, that we don't need our imagination. What would you say to that, Tim?
Well, I say that imagination, creativity are very important to the writing process at any age because when you're writing a story, you want your story to stand out from all the other stories that are out there. And if you write a story that's kind of bland and predictable, people aren't as likely to read your stuff. But when you're writing a creative, especially fiction, you get to put your own personal, unique touches on the story. It's your world, it's your characters. You can write it in any way you want to. And that's one of the things I love most about writing fiction is it's your rules in that story.
Right, right. Get to make it unique to you, which I think is really cool. How do you think it would apply even outside of writing? Like, how do you use your imagination even outside of it?
Well, you can use it in many different ways, like with as far as, and this relates to writing, but as far as coming up with ideas on how to, after you publish your book, you can promote it in many creative ways. Like I have a newsletter that I send out every month and YouTube channel. I do different book events. So there are lots of ways that you can use creativity in the writing process and after the writing process is over.
So, in other words, like creativity is not just, or imagination isn't just for a certain group of people. It's for pretty much everybody. Would you say?
I would say that. I mean, every writer has their own style and their own genre that they write, but I would definitely say that you never want to outgrow creativity as a writer. You want to use it because, like I said, you determine your own unique story. So if your story is predictable and like people can tell how it's going to go, you definitely don't want that as a writer. You want them to feel as though the story is alive. It's really happening. Like the characters are real people. That's what you're shooting for in a fictional novel.
Right. Yeah, I love that. All right, my second question is, so based off of my experience, all my writing has pretty much been academic. But I'm sure as you grow into writing your own type of things, that there has to be a change. So how do you make that mindset shift from academic writing to your own creative writing for your books and things like that?
Well, you have to realize that they're two completely different forms of writing. So when you're writing an academic setting, you're writing for a teacher and you're writing under a specific set of rules and instructions given to you by that teacher. So page limits, word count, you have instructions that you have to follow. When you're writing for yourself as a creative writer, you have the freedom, like I said, your world, your characters to make it as long or short or as creative and crazy as you want to make it. So, like, you do not want to think of your novel as an assignment for school. Because when we think of assignments for school, it's students tend to think of them as I need to do this to get a good grade. It's not something I would do for fun or I want to do, but I understand that it's what I have to do to pass the class. When you're writing for yourself, it should be something that you want to do in your free time because you enjoy it. So, shifting that mindset of this is something I need to do versus something I want to do, that's very important to understand the difference between academic writing and creative writing.
And do you think there's any need to change the way that it stresses you in a way? Like I think academic writing is very stressful for people. Do you think that that's a problem if you carry that into your creative writing?
Well, I think that all writing is going to be stressful at some point, no matter what you do, because writer's block is a real problem that a lot of people struggle with. But like with academic writing, you have deadlines, and those deadlines are there to keep you accountable and make sure you're not putting it off until the last minute and doing it the night before the assignment's due. So there's stress there, but that serves a purpose. I think that with your own personal writing, you should definitely have some deadlines. They don't have to be like definite deadlines, like I have to be done by this time, but you should be keeping the process going. And you should, because a lot of times what I've seen is people start a novel and they're really excited about it. And then they realize how big of a project it is and they get busy and it kind of gets shelved. So you don't want that to happen to you. So having that stress in the sense of you're keeping yourself going and keeping yourself writing, even when, there are going to be days you don't want to, but you still need to finish the story.
Mm. What would you say to a writer who starts a story like you said, and then at some point they say, "Well, I don't actually I don't like where this is going. I don't think this is good." Like they have their own insecurities about it. What would you say to them? Should they keep going? Should they try to embrace the creativity a little bit longer, or should they kind of scrap it?
Well, all writers are going to have insecurities because, I mean, you're taking your work and you're offering it up for the world to read. So you're always going to be thinking, is this good enough? Should I change this? There are insecurities. It's part of being a writer. But I would say that if you had a great idea and then you're kind of not so sure about it, my advice would be rewrite it in different ways because the only way that a story has to be permanent is after it goes to print. If it hasn't gone to print yet, it hasn't been published, you can still change it at any time. So you can go back and rewrite it. You can try out different endings, different new characters, and see what clicks. As the writer, you'll know when your story's done and when it's ready.
Yeah, and as a writer, how do you know that you're not forcing it? How do you know that you're actually being creative and letting it kind of flow? And how do you, or and when do you cross that line into where you're kind of forcing the writing process?
Well, obviously, you don't want to take forever because, you want to get the story out there for people to read, but you don't want to rush it either because you're putting your name on this story. It should be your best work. So, the best way, in my experience, to know is, going through it and reading it for yourself after you finished. Ask yourself, are you satisfied with the way the story turned out?
Mm.
Another thing you can do is find a friend or family member and give it to them to read. Someone you would trust who would give you good feedback and just say, "Well, what do you think of this?" before you release it to the general public.
Yeah, I love that, man. All right, my next question is just kind of taking a different turn, but I want to ask, what characteristics about writing do you think apply to our walk with Christ?
Well, with this one, there are lots of different answers I could give because the first one I would say would be when you write something, and I've said this before, you're putting your name on it, and what we write reflects us as the writer. And as Christians, we reflect Christ in the church. So I would say definitely, being cautious with what you write. Now, that's not to say you can't make the story however you want to, be as creative as you want to be, but just realize once you put something into print, you can't take it back. If you realize, oh, I made a mistake, or oh, I wrote this wrong, or I didn't see how this would sound in my head, it's once it's in print, it's too late at that point. So I would just say, remember, advise caution. Another thing I could also say is even if you're not writing specifically Christian stuff, you're just writing regular fiction, you can still use your abilities as a writer to glorify God because ultimately he's the one who gave us the ability in the first place. Like, for example, one of my short stories I wrote is based off a biblical story. It's about the story where Jesus leaves the 99 sheep to go after the one that was lost. I wrote a fictional short story from the perspective of that lost sheep who she left the flock and had to be saved by the good shepherd. So you can definitely use your creativity to write and glorify God. And but like I said, just I would advise caution when you're writing. Always proofread, always check and make sure that what you're putting on the page sounds right. And use pray about it, use your skills to best honor the Lord.
That's right, man. I love that. We're supposed to do everything with excellence, and we bear his name as we follow and trying to follow after him. So that's really important that what we work on, we put our hands to is there to glorify his name. So I love that, man. And I love that you're doing that, even though I mean your stories aren't all about, like you said, you have that one about the lost sheep, but your stories aren't all about Christian values, but you can tell that they're well thought out there, and that as people get to know you, they get to know how you're a follower of him, which is really cool.
And like I said, the stories don't have to be specifically biblically based. You can write them however you like. It's all about that you are using your creativity to make the best story that you can.
Yeah, exactly. I love it, bro. Um, and my last question is that what are some good practices that you have that inspire your creativity?
Well, I think with the writing process, like I said, the biggest problem I've seen is lack of follow through. People start novels, it's a bigger project, and it just kind of gets shelved. So to definitely use your creativity, I would say key things you're going to do is you're going to want to have a space where you can go to write that is free of distractions, whether it be people, cell phone distractions, whatever the case may be, a place you can be that's quiet and you can be alone with your thoughts in the blank page. That's very important. A routine is definitely important. Having a set time that you write, and again, everybody's schedule with school and work and stuff is going to be different, but trying to write, like, say, a certain amount of time every day, like, say, half an hour to an hour, and just having that time where you're trying to get as much work done as you possibly can in that time. I would avoid trying to set like a certain word count for the day, like say 250 words today, because in my experience what happens is people, and I've done this myself, where you get to like say 240 words and you start adding in filler words just to kind of get that word count to where you want it to be. And when you're writing a novel, you don't want to have lots of pages of filler words because every word in your story should serve to move your story forward, have a purpose. So
Right,
you definitely
right.
want to avoid that if you can.
Yeah, that's good. One thing that was just brought to my attention, we talked about it recently, but just the idea of habit stacking. I'm in the realm of like training, and I learned this recently that if you stack a habit with another habit that you already have, then you're gonna be more likely to do that. So how that works is if like you say you're gonna write, then say you're gonna write for like 30 minutes after you eat dinner. So then every day you already know you're going to eat dinner, like that's a habit in your life, you're not going to miss that. So then after that, you know you're going to write for 30 minutes, so it's easier to stack something if you already have something there. It doesn't have to be that example, but hopefully that's like helpful for you guys just to hear that like you don't have to like put it all on its own because it's a lot harder to build a habit if it's on its own. But if you build it with something else that you already have, it's a lot easier to be able to sustain the habit.
Well, and to add on to that too, it's like you said, it doesn't have to be one specific thing because, like I said, with school, work, everybody's schedule, like they may not be able to have a specific time each and every day of the week where they can do something.
Yeah,
They might have to, move it around at different times to fit their schedule, which is fine because, if you miss a day every once in a while, that's not the end of the world. The most important thing is that you continue to the next day get back on track. It's
right,
it's easy to break a habit if you're first starting out with it, but the most important thing is that if you have an idea that you really want to become a book someday, you gotta have follow through, and it's not going to be easy. I mean, the starting point, it looks so big. Like when you look at, say, a 250 page novel and you're on page one, it looks like a huge task. But
right,
if you just take it day by day, page by page, slowly, eventually you're gonna be done before you know it.
right,
And it should take quite a while because you don't want a story that's rushed and just you cranked it out to get it done just to say you did it. You have to be able to say, well, this is my best work. I poured my heart into this work.
right. Yeah, I think as far as building like routines, the thing I see so often is like people beat themselves up over like little problems or like I guess as far as writing goes, like you said, if you miss a day, I think people will beat themselves up over it, and then you end up like worse off than if you just got back on the horse the next day, or if you like messed up a page or something like that, then um, I would say I feel like people would beat them. I would beat myself up for something like that. So, what are your thoughts on that, and what would you say to somebody who is often very hard on themselves for the like missing a day or not writing it the way that they wanted to, or things like that?
Well, you had talked about the idea of messing up a page, and I want to talk on that because at the end of the day, and I've said this before, nothing has to be finalized until your story is going to be published. So if you mess up a page, you can always go back and edit and proofread. I mean, that's why that part of the process is there to catch the mistakes that you missed the first time around. And so if you mess up a little bit, it's not a big deal. You can always go back and fix it and change it. I've had parts of my stories where I wrote something and then like 3 months later came back and I'm like, well, I want to try a completely different direction. And I had to change it to make the story flow better. So I think we don't want to get to the point where we are so sure that something has to stay in our story because
Mm.
ultimately we don't want to just focus on one piece of the story. The whole story has to flow together and make sense to the reader. So definitely saying like going back, double checking your mistakes. And I wouldn't say to answer your question better be overly hard on yourself because I mean we're all human, we all are gonna make mistakes. But I would say definitely being hard on yourself in the sense that you're holding yourself accountable to fix the mistakes and making sure you're catching them and then doing better the next time around. I would definitely say you want to have that.
Right. Well, kind of building off of creativity, I wanted to ask one more thing. How important do you think it is when you get into that state where you can kind of just flow and the creativity just flow and it seems like the pages are just flying by. How important is that? And should you be chasing that as a writer?
I would say most definitely yes, because you're going to have days like that where it just feels like the story is writing itself. And then you're going to have days with writer's block where it's like you can't finish a page to save your life. So you're going to have those high and low points. And if you're in a moment where it's really going well, you definitely want to capitalize on that and keep going as much as you can. And in a situation like that, I had one weekend where I was writing and I was able to get 2 or 3 chapters done in one weekend just because I had the time and I was in the creative mood and I was able to write it. So I would definitely say when you have moments like that, take advantage of them. Now, obviously, you still have to do things like sleep and eat visit with your families and be social, but
Yeah, yeah,
within reason, if you have the time and your schedule is allowing you to, you definitely want to take advantage of that. Another thing that I've also found helps is if you are a very busy person and you can't just sit down and take an hour or two every once in a while, take notes, pull out your phone. Say you
mm,
come up with a good
that's
idea at
good.
work, and you're at work, you don't have time for another 6 hours to write anything. Just take a quick note on your phone, say, whatever the note is for this chapter, and then you can pull out that note later when you have time and use it to remember whatever it was that the good idea that you had.
Right. Really capitalize on that time. I love that. And would you say if even if you're not in that type of state, but it's your like time to write, should you still try and write?
I think so, yes, because even if you're just writing down notes, like I said, say you're writing down other ideas that you're not putting into the story, but that could potentially be in the story someday. You know, you always want to take the opportunity to write because, say, for example, you don't have a day where you're in a writing mood and you decide I'm not going to write today. You're pushing your story off further and further into the future. So like you want to be consistent as best as you can, even if you're not feeling up to it that day.
I love that. Well, that's all I have as far as questions go, man. I appreciate you. I mean, having me on here. I've learned a lot just about creativity and building routines and things like that. Like I said, I'm not a writer, but it's been cool to kind of hear your process and how you think through this type of stuff. So I'm honored that you would have me on here, and thank you, man.
You're welcome. There is one more thing I would like to add just as a wrap up, and this is just from experience. When you're about to release a story, like you're nearing the end, you should never ever tell people the story will be published on this specific date because
Mm,
then if something goes wrong at the last minute, you have to tell everybody, well, it's going to be another 3 months or whatever the case may be. So I would always recommend that you just kind of, when you're releasing your story, give yourself a little bit of leeway there to say, well, it could be, in 3 months or whenever you're going to release it, but definitely don't set yourself to a specific date that you're going to tell everybody about. But yeah, so that would be all the advice I have for you guys today. Thank you again for coming, Ryan. And if you guys would like to check out any of my material, any of my books, you can find it on my website, timstales.net. I have a monthly newsletter, YouTube channel, and now this podcast is on there as well. So, yeah, you can definitely check that out there. And if you guys have any topics or questions that you would like to discuss with me, send them in. And next time you might get picked to be on the air with me in this podcast. So thank you guys for tuning in today, and I will see you guys next time.